Chapter 2. Understanding our domestications and attachments. There is an old Toltec story that has been shared across generations in my family about a shaman who called himself the Smoky Mirror. He gave himself the name once because he became aware of the smoke that not only clouded his vision and controlled his will, but also did the same to everyone around him. A recounting of the Smoky Mirror story will be helpful as we begin to go deeper into the mastery of self. After many years of study, in a moment of great realization, a shaman experiences the truth. I am made of light. I am made of stars. The real us is pure love, pure light, he says, and he looks around his village, and he knows that everyone and everything he sees is a manifestation of God. He is intuitively understanding that the human journey is a process of the divine becoming aware of itself. Moved by this realization, the shaman immediately wants to share this information with everyone in his village, but when he does, it becomes clear that no one else understands. The shaman then realizes that there is a smoky fog between him and others, and this fog doesn't allow people to see beyond the tips of their own nose. This fog controls every action and every belief. The shaman also notices that he interacts with others in the fog. The shaman also notices that as he interacts with others, the fog tries to assert its control over him again. But as soon as he notices the fog creeping back in, the simple act of noticing the fog makes it dissipate. As the fog recedes, he becomes aware of a mirror in front of him, and he can vaguely see his reflection. When the fog completely clears, he can see himself fully again. The shaman is aware that he is the truth, and the reflection in the mirror is a reminder. It only reflects the truth. He begins to understand the reflection as an instrument of awareness. Every time the fog begins to creep in and keep him from knowing who he really is, he could look to his mirror. If it is cloudy, he can't see himself. He knows he is on the wrong track, trapped in the fog. But as soon as he remembers his authentic self, the smoke immediately begins to clear. To remind himself of who he really is and the power of the fog to obscure his perception, the shaman changes his name to Smoky Mirror. This powerful story encapsulates a core teaching in the Toltec family tradition. The fog represents our attachments to our domestications, which together keep us from experiencing the truth of who we are. Domestications. Let me begin to explain domestications with a simple story. Imagine a child of 8 or 9 having lunch with his grandmother, who has prepared soup for their afternoon meal. They sit together and converse, enjoying each other's company and the love they share. After finishing half his bowl of soup, the child realizes he is full. "I don't want the rest, Grandma. I am full." "You must eat your soup, grandson," she replies. Whether you're a parent or not, it's likely clear what the boy's grandmother is trying to do. Her intentions are admirable. She wants him to eat in order to be nourished. When he declines, she tries to convince him to eat more by offering him a reward for doing what she wants. This is the first tool of domestication. "You must finish your soup," she says. "It'll make you grow up big and strong, like Superman." But the boy is undeterred. "No, I am not hungry," he insists. "I do not want to eat right now." In addition to not being hungry, the child is also enjoying the feeling of asserting himself, because he feels powerful to say no, to express his free will. He can also feel the same sense of power when he says yes to things he wants, and it feels good to say it. This is how young children, including ourselves when we were young, learn about the power of intent, by saying yes and no. Eventually, the boy reaches the threshold of his grandmother's patience, and when the carrot doesn't work, she reaches for the stick to impose her will upon him. Like many grandparents and their parents before them, she crosses the line of respect for her choice and his choice, and adds punishment. In this case, guilt and shaming, which is the second tool of domestication. Do you know how many children don't have a thing to eat around the world? They are starving, and here you are, wasting your food. It is a sin to waste food. Now the young boy is concerned. He doesn't want to look like a selfish child, and he really doesn't want to be seen as a sinner in his grandmother's eyes. With a sense of defeat, he relents and subjugates his will. Okay, Grandma, I will finish my soup. He begins to eat again, and he doesn't stop until the bowl is empty. Then, with the tenderness that makes her grandson feel safe and loved, Grandma says, "That's my good boy." The boy learns that by complying with the rules of the dream, he could earn a reward. In this case, he's a good boy in the eyes of his grandmother and receives her love and encouragement. The punishment would have been to be seen as a selfish child, a sinner in her eyes, and a bad boy. This is a simple example of domestication in action. No one doubts that the grandmother has the best of intentions. She loves her grandson and wants him to eat his lunch, but the method she is using to achieve that goal has negative unintended consequences. Anytime guilt and shame are deployed as tools to provoke action, this counters any good that has been achieved. Eventually, those negative elements will resurface in one way or another. In this case, let's imagine that when the boy grows up, the domestication that occurred around this issue is so strong that it is still an imposing power over him well into adulthood. For instance, many years later, he goes into a restaurant where they serve big plates of food. And halfway through his meal, his body signals him the truth for that moment. I am full. Consciously or subconsciously, he hears a voice. It is a sin to waste food. Consciously or subconsciously, he answers, "Yes, Grandma," and continues to eat. Finishing his plate like a good boy, he responds to his domestication rather than his needs of the moment. In that instance, he completely goes against himself by continuing to eat after his body has already let him know that he is full. The idea is so strong that it overrules his body's natural preference to stop. Overeating may damage his body, which is one of the negative consequences in this case of using guilt and shame as a tool. The other consequence is that he is experiencing internal suffering by reliving a past moment of guilt and shame, and it is controlling his actions in the present. Finally, note that the grandmother is not even present in this current situation, as he has now taken up the reins of domestication and subjugated his own will without anyone else's influence. In the Toltec tradition, we refer to this phenomena as self-domestication. As my father likes to say, humans are the only animal on the planet that self-domesticates. The relationship between the boy and the grandmother forms a part of the dream of the planet, and the lunch between the grandmother and the grandson is a basic example of how domestication and self-domestication within the dream occurs. The grandmother domesticated her grandson in that moment, but he continues to self-domesticate himself long after that. Self-domestication is the act of accepting ourselves on the condition that we live up to the ideas have adopted from others in the dream of the planet, without ever considering if those ideas are what we truly want. While the consequences of finishing a bowl of soup are minimal, domestication and self-domestication can take much more serious and darker forms as well. For instance, many of us have learned to be critical of our physical appearance because it wasn't good enough by society's standards. We were presented with the belief that we weren't tall enough, thin enough, or that our skin wasn't the right color, and the moment we agreed with that belief, we begun to self-domesticate. Because we've adopted an external belief, we either reject or tried to change our physical appearance so we could feel worthy of our own self-acceptance and the acceptance of others. Imagine for a moment the many industries that would cease to exist if we all loved our bodies exactly the way they were. To be clear, Domestication regarding body image is different from wanting to lose weight in order to be healthy, or even having a preference to look a certain way. The key difference is that with a preference, you come from a place of self-love and self-acceptance, whereas with domestication, you start from a place of shame, guilt, and not being enough. The line between these two could be thin sometimes, and a master of self is one who could look within and determine his or her true motive. Another popular form of domestication in the current dream of the planet revolves around social class and material possession. There is an underlying belief that promulgated by society that those who have the most stuff or those who hold certain jobs are somehow more important than the rest. I, for one, have never met anyone more important than anyone else, as we are all beautiful and unique creations of the divine. And yet, many people pursue career paths they dislike and buy things they don't really want or need in an effort to achieve the elusive goals of pure acceptance and self-acceptance. Instances such as these, and we can think of many others, are the ways in which domestication leads to self-domestication, and the result is that we have people living lives that aren't their own. Let me share an example of a close friend who was domesticated in this way and how he broke free. From a very young age, my friend was encouraged by his family to become a lawyer. They filled his young mind with stories of money and power and told him he had all the skills that was necessary in this endeavor. With the encouragement of his family, my friend studied pre-law in college and went straight into law school. But shortly after he arrived, he found that he couldn't stand the practice of law. In hindsight, he realized he had been domesticated to the idea of being an attorney and was going to make him rich, powerful, and most importantly, special in the eyes of his family. But the truth was that in adopting this path, he was following their dreams instead of his own. When he announced to his family that he was dropping out of law school, many of them were disappointed and tried desperately to change his mind. But he was able to stay firm by relying on his own intent. That was many years ago, and now he chuckles when he remembers his former plans, as he is very happy in his current profession as an author and a spiritual teacher. This example illustrates how ideas that were planted in us as children and beyond often don't reflect our preferred path. But, just like my friend, you have chosen the power inside of you to break free from any domestication that you've experienced, and the first step in doing so is becoming aware of that domestication and finding out what is true for you. Lastly, I want to be clear that although I have been focused on negative aspects of domestication, not all domestication result in negative consequences. In other words, just because an idea was planted in you via domestication doesn't mean that the idea is a bad one and you must reject it. If it is consistent with your true preferences in life, that's wonderful. For instance, if my friend had ended up enjoying the practice of law, then there would have been no reason to make a career change. Once you've decided for yourself with a clear mind that is a particular idea or belief that works for you, there's nothing wrong with maintaining it. The point is that you make the conscious choice. Attachment. In its most basic sense, attachment begins with the items in the world. You can see this in young children, around the age of 2, when they first begin to associate and declare objects in their possession as mine. Anyone who has ever attempted to make a 2-year-old part with a toy can attest to the power of attachment. Although this is where attachment to items begins, it certainly does not end there. As often, the more harmful attachments we hold are the unseen ones. And by this, I mean our attachments to our own ideas, opinions, and beliefs. In my previous book, The 5 Levels of Attachment, I explain the concept of attachment in detail, and I offer a measuring stick for the varying degrees to which you can become tied to your own beliefs, ideas, and opinions. For the purpose of understanding attachment and how it relates to the mastery of self, I will use an abbreviated example of the popular story that appears in that book. This example illustrates how, if we aren't careful, attachments can quickly become unhealthy and could cause suffering in our lives. Imagine you like soccer. You don't have a particular team or player that you root for, and it doesn't matter if it's taking place in a magnificent stadium or a dirt-filled field. Both are equally good for a fan who just loves watching the game. The players could be great or mediocre, and you wouldn't care as long as everyone playing is enjoying the game. As you watch, you generally don't choose to root for or against one side, and even if you do choose to root for a particular team, you do so with very little emotional investment, just enough to make the game more exciting. As a result, regardless of which team wins the game, it has nothing to do with you personally, and you have not made rooting for a particular team a part of your identity. The moment the referee blows the whistle that ends the game, regardless which team wins or loses, you leave the game behind. You walk out of the stadium, continue on with your life, having enjoyed a good game. In this context, when you watch the game, you are simply enjoying a moment in time without any attachment to the outcome. You experience the purest form of joy, stemming from your desire to experience the game for the sake of the game, or life without conditions. You maintain your personal freedom throughout the process, as the outcome of the game didn't impact your life one bit. Keeping with this analogy, let's imagine that you like soccer, but now you're a committed fan to a particular team. Their colors strike an emotional chord inside of you. When the referee blows the whistle, the result of the game affects you on an emotional level. You are elated when your team wins, and when your team loses, you feel disappointed. Your attachment to your team begins to impact your personal life outside of the stadium gates as you relate to the world as a fan. For example, when your team loses, you might have a bad day at work, argue with somebody about who or what was responsible for the loss, or feel sad despite the many other good things going on around you. No matter what the effect is, you let your attachment to a particular outcome change your persona. Your attachment to the soccer bleeds into the world that has nothing to do with it. If this attachment is left unchecked, it'll become stronger and more entrenched, until the story of victory and defeat of your favorite team is now about you. Your team's performance affects your self-worth. When reading the stats, you admonish players for making us look bad. If your opposing team wins, you get angry that they beat you. Not only have you brought the game home, but you have completely incorporated the game into a part of who you are, shaping your identity by your belief of what it means to be a real fan. Although the soccer team has nothing to do with you in reality, your self-importance correlates with the success or failure of this team because you choose to identify yourself with them in particular. Your life and your attachment to this team are so blurred that you can no longer separate the two, and you believe that anyone who doesn't agree with you about your team is wrong. You might even begin to make a loyalty to this team a condition by which you allow others to be in a relationship with you. If you're having difficulty relating to the sports analogy, let's consider two real-life examples. At the end of a soccer season in Europe, a big-name club was relegated to a lower division after a decisive loss. After witnessing this loss, a fan went home and hung himself. For him, life was no longer worth living if his team wasn't in the Premier League. In another instance, a bus driver was a fan of a losing team, and he was so upset at a particular loss that he drove his bus into a group of people wearing the winning team's jersey. 4 people died wearing the wrong colors. The man's attachment to his team was so great that he killed for it. For these 2 people, the joy of watching the soccer for the sake of soccer was lost long ago. Fortunately, murder and suicide due to a favorite team's losses are rare occurrences. But when we turn to topics such as religion, politics, money, sex, power, and negative consequences are far more numerous. When you become attached to an object, an idea, or a belief, you make it a part of who you are. Then, once your fog has you, your vision is obscured. You no longer see the humanity of an individual who doesn't agree with you. You only see the personification of an idea that you stand against. When your mirror is clear, you could see the divinity in everyone. You could go to any church, any synagogue, temple, mosque, or drum circle, and you could feel and you could find the love and grace of God. For those who are lost in the fog, God just happens to be the focus of devotion that religion is centered on. In other words, the beliefs and rituals of the religion are more important than experiencing God in the present moment. This is the power of unhealthy attachment. Understanding the relationship between domestication and attachment. In the example of a soccer fan, an attachment arose out of something that was genuinely loved, the game of soccer. The fan allows his love for the game to draw him into the fog, and he has made the game a part of his identity and confused his association with the team for who he really was. In the example of the boy and his grandmother, the boy was domesticated to the idea that he must finish all his food, and though the idea wasn't true for him, as an adult, he adhered to the idea that he should finish his food even if his body is indicating something that is to the contrary. As a result, he is now attached to that idea. The difference to understand is this. Attachment doesn't always come from domestication, but domestication left unchecked always leads to attachment. Here's what the evolution from domestication to attachment looks like. Domestication. You are domesticated to an idea through interacting with others in the dream of the planet. A grandmother domesticates her grandson to the idea that it's a sin not to finish all the food on his plate. Self-domestication. Once the idea lodges inside you and you accept it, it becomes a belief that you no longer need an outside domesticator to enforce this idea. You'll do it yourself. This is self-domestication in action. The grandson grows up and habitually finishes all of his food on his plate when he isn't hungry. Level 3, attachment. You are now attached to this belief, and depending on how strong your attachment is, your acceptance of yourself and others is contingent upon fulfilling the belief. The grandson feels guilty if he doesn't finish his food on his plate. He admonishes his friends for not finishing their food, and he domesticates his children to the same idea. As you can see, attachments can often arise from domestication. The irony is that when this happens, you become attached to an idea that you didn't even agree with initially, but only adopted because of domestication. The end result is, without awareness, you would adhere to ideas that aren't even true for you, as well as push them on others. Domestication and attachment work hand in hand to keep you separated from your authentic self, lost in the fog and smoke, trapped in the drama of the party. This cycle, domestication, self-domestication, attachment, can continue for generations until you transform into a master of self and break the chain. The following exercise will help you begin to identify your own domestications and attachments. Once you have recognized them, then you can decide if you are ready to let them go or not. Noticing your domestications. Take a moment to look over your life. What are some of the ideas that were installed in you as a child that you later discarded and are no longer true for you? These could be ideas about educations and career, money, material possession, politics, religion, or any number of the other areas. Remember, the point here isn't to judge or become resentful of those who initially domesticated you to those ideas, but rather to see where domestication occurred and how you broke free. By noticing where you have already spotted and released domestication in your life, you prove to yourself that you have all the power you need inside you to break free again and again. Identifying your attachments. Since attachments begin with material possession, the first part of the exercise is designed to show you the items in your life that have incorporated into your sense of self. Think of an item you own that you absolutely love, something that you wouldn't want to lose. Perhaps it's your car, your home, your money, an electronic gadget, a piece of jewelry, a special memento, or even a religious or sacred object. The point is to pick an object that you feel strongly about, something that is tied to your sense of self. Very few people who look honestly and deeply will find that there is nothing in the world that doesn't fit this description. On a blank piece of paper, write down the items and then answer the following questions. Why do you feel strongly about this item? What sense of security does it give you? How is this item tied to your identity or sense of self? How does it boost your ego? Are you pleased to show this item to others, or is it an item that you show to no one and secretly feel special for having? Does owning it make you feel more attractive than others, wealthier, more secure, more intelligent, or more spiritual? Be truthful. Reacting honestly from your current emotions, there are no right or wrong answers. The point is to explore your deeper associations with material things. Now, crumple up the piece of paper and discard it. Close your eyes and imagine that this item no longer exists in your life. How do you feel? What would life be like without it? Who would you be without this item? Now that you have explored the idea of losing the item, ask yourself the following questions. Is this attachment affecting your relationship with the people in your life? Is your attachment causing you to play it safe and not pursue other things you really want? Can you think of any times you've altered your actions because of this item? How does the item affect your personal freedom? Finally, do you want to keep this level of attachment, or do you want to decrease it or even let it go? The choice is always yours. As you review your answers, witness the level of fear you experience at the prospect of losing your item. The more acute the fear, the greater the chance that your attachment will lead to suffering if this item is lost. The dream of the planet, one thing is certain. This item will ultimately collapse, corrode, or disappear. Nothing in the dream lasts forever. Repeat the exercise and pick a person, a belief, a role, a body image, or an idea to examine. This could be your position in the home, your father, mother, or son, or some other capacity that you act that enhances your sense of self. Are you attached to a particular role you play? How would you feel if that role changed suddenly? Are you attached to how you look? What if your appearance changed overnight? Just like physical objects and social roles, even the people in our lives are designed to change and fall away. Who would you be without them? If you are like most people, you will find that you are in different levels of attachment with many items, beliefs, and roles. Those levels can fluctuate. Simply becoming aware of these attachments is a big step in releasing their power over you. The moment you become aware of an attachment is the moment it begins to lose its hold over you. Identifying attachments and imagining their collapse gives you the opportunity to see the authentic self free of any attachment, as ultimately the truth of who you are is much greater than any item, role, or belief. Without awareness, our domestication and attachments blur our perceptions. Recognizing both allows us to clear the fog and to see the truth in the present moment. In the next chapter, we'll explore the force that gives domestication and attachments their power, as well as the force that a master of self uses to obliterate them. Woo! Spicy. Love it. We're going to be starting chapter 3 next time. Stick around.